Thank you very much, Peter, for that perfect introduction. I also respectfully acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and wasn't Richard wonderful in his welcome to country for us? It reminds us that for over 40,000 years, our Aboriginal heritage has been looking to the stars, and we've been astronomers, as Peter pointed out, for many, many decades. Thank you for the opportunity to give you an update. This is a bit of a scorecard presentation. We've been on deck now for 12 weeks, so we figured it would be only fitting to give you a little bit of a scorecard of what we've been doing. But firstly, I wanted to thank many people in this audience who have personally contributed to all of the steps along the way for Australia to have its Australian Space Agency. I can assure you that our little team is doing its absolute best to serve both your vision and to serve this nation. And when we went out to the nation to ask what it wanted of an Australian Space Agency, it was crystal clear to us, and we are simply trying to live out that message that we've heard. Premier, I think actually the Premier's gone off to a cabinet meeting, but I wanted to acknowledge the Honourable Mark McGowan, Premier of WA. Thank you very much, Governor. Kim, it was a wonderful presentation. I now know we'll call on you because I think you've covered most of what I was going to cover, so we'll be able to catch up some time, thanks to Kim. Vice-Chancellor Dawn Freshwater doing such a fantastic job at UWA. Honourable Julie Bishop, it's wonderful to have you here, and thank you again for your support in establishing the agency. Senator Penny Wong, it's wonderful to be able to have bipartisan support to establish something for the nation. Senator Linda Reynolds, who's been a tireless campaigner for the work that we're doing. Professor Peter Clinken, the Chief Scientist of Western Australia, thank you again. And of course we have Commander Pam Melroy. It's not often that you have the commander of the Space Shuttle and participant on the International Space Station with us. I also wanted to acknowledge the students here. Governor, you mentioned Skylab. I was a student when Skylab crashed to Earth, and I was studying late at night, and on the radio they said, quick, anyone who's awake, don't waste any time, rush outside, look to this particular point in the sky. So I was studying, Dawn, probably the night before an exam, and I saw the most spectacular multicoloured falling star that you would ever see. I didn't know that we sent them a bill, so I'll have to remind them of that. I'll get a copy of that, but wonderful. So some of the things that I was inspired by a piece of space debris, so there you go. So I wanted to quickly outline just an update on the government funding, the role and purpose of the agency, and give you a quick update of our first 12 weeks, and then quickly highlight the strategic priorities, which Kim has already done, so if I run out of time, I won't need to cover those. And I do have the clicker here. I think I've got to go back one. No, we're good. Okay, so we've talked about our very, very proud history in space, and Kim has covered that as a wonderful historian as well, and I know that you think about these things. But we were the third country to launch a satellite which was built on home soil, and when Neil Armstrong wrote to the team at Honeysuckle Creek, in his wonderful, humble manner, he said it wasn't extraordinary that I walked on the moon. Of course it was. But what was extraordinary was that the world watched. And of course we all know that Australia had a wonderful role in making sure that the world could watch that historic moment. We've have a very proud history in radar and radio astronomy, as Peter Quinn has outlined. But it's true we have not fully participated in the growing space economy to the level of which we are capable, to the level of our creativity, our entrepreneurship, our can-do attitude. Australia has not been participating to its level, and we certainly want to do so. So like many of you, I was very pleased and welcomed the resounding $300 million investment in the federal May budget in space, and in particular investing in 2 of the priority areas that have been identified. The budget provided some $260 million for 3 major projects, $161 million to Geoscience Australia to bring up our GPS, our positioning accuracy, up to world standard, which is 10 centimetres, across all of our land, across all of our maritime jurisdiction, and across all of our airspace. And of course, 10 centimetres is about half the span of a hand. We were behind the world. The world expected us to catch up, but they didn't expect the next bit. There was $64 million provided to Geoscience Australia to deliver world-leading 3 centimetre accuracy wherever we have a mobile phone network and we can get the additional correction. Now, in our cities, that's 99% of our population will have world-leading 3 centimetre accuracy. That allows you to have automated vehicles, to automate your transport, to do things that we haven't dreamed of. And that took the world by surprise. They expected us to catch up. They did not expect us to go to world-leading in the same announcement. So fantastic. There was another $37 million to commercialise and export Digital Earth Australia. Australia did what no other nation has done, and I take my hat off to the Geoscience Australia team. We didn't have our own satellite, so we had to figure out how to use everybody else's data. We had 30 to 40 years of satellite information. The team at Geoscience Australia physically drove that information on tapes to the supercomputer in Canberra. And they spent $300 to $400 million to correct every single image and rectify it, make sure it absolutely fit correctly over every 10 square kilometres of our land and our coastal region. Which means now that anyone can take an area and you can look at a time sequence of data for 30 years over that same part of the country. And this is something that we think other countries want to engage. Recently, we signed an agreement last week in Germany with Canada, and Canada will now be the first country to adopt Australia's platform. We have other countries lined up to do so. The budget also provided ongoing funding to the agency and some $15 million to kickstart our international engagement. I also note here, as Kim did, that Defence will provide an important ballast, because Defence will be investing some $10 billion in the space arena over the next 20 years, so very important for us. So the purpose of the agency, we set ourselves a very commercial purpose, which was to transform and grow a globally respected Australian space industry, but also to make sure that we increase the use of space across all of the aspects of our broader economy for competitiveness and for productivity and for jobs. And this will improve the lives of all Australians. We cannot do this without international and national partnership and collaboration. We want to build those partnerships with really the shared ambitions in space, and this will be key to our success. There's a couple of key roles for us, and I can remember writing this in the review that we needed one door and one voice, and having written that and now actually doing it, boy, were we ever missing out. Theoretically sort of articulating that, but I think it was absolutely captured last week. I had 3 meetings with the administrator of NASA, which was fantastic that he shared that much time. But he said to me, I'm embarrassed that NASA doesn't do more with Australia. I'm embarrassed. And we absolutely want to do more with you. So that was the single message that we took home. We needed that door. We need to ensure that Australia is a responsible global citizen in a rule-based order for space, something that's come out of the Foreign Policy White Paper. We will also advise on national policy and strategy for the civil space sector. We'll coordinate Australia's domestic space activities and administer the space legislation and international obligations as well. We're signatory, one of only 18 countries that are signatory to all the United Nations treaties on space, and we'll do that in partnership with DFAT, in particular to make sure that we contribute to a rules-based order in space. A vital part of what we need to do is also inspire young people, connect parents and their kids to their innate curiosity to learn more about space. And I can tell each one of the students here that everyone at the Australian Space Agency is very curious to know more And that's all I ask of you. Just be curious to know more about space and to learn more about space, and you'll be hooked pretty damn quick. So our first few weeks. What's been astounding for us is we set ourselves the target of 5 million Australians knowing, hearing, seeing, reading about the agency in our first year. In our first 12 weeks, 20 million Australians have heard, seen or read about the agency. We've been overwhelmed. We realise that this nation has completely embraced the step that we're taking to take the nation into this further economy. So extraordinary coverage. And the letters that we get as well, I get personal letters. You don't realise how much some of our young people felt that this was blocked or barred for them. And they say, I wanted to do this, but I never thought I'd be able to do it as Australian. Now I believe I can. And that's pretty touching, I can tell you. We've also engaged with the states and territories. In our first 4 weeks, in fact, we met with premiers and first ministers. We had follow-up meetings, really to look at the issue of location of the space agency. So we're progressing that. The agreements and opening that door, our first agreement with the French agency, and President Macron said when he was visiting, we know that when Australia really gets behind its efforts in space, it will be unstoppable. And so it was interesting to hear his confidence. As Kim mentioned, we also have managed to have a resolution on the House of Representatives in the US, a wonderful umbrella for us. We hope to progress that through to Congress to provide an umbrella that says to all of the US agencies, not just NASA, but NOAA and other agencies, to work with us. So we're working on that as well. We signed an agreement with the UK Space Agency. Australia, through CSIRO, has its first partner with the UK Space Agency, with the Surrey satellite Novasar, and we will be able to control 10% of that satellite as it passes over. It collects radar, so you can work through the day and the night, and it can see both terrain changes, it can see the ocean. It's going to be a wonderful new tool. The Canadian Space Agency we signed an agreement with last week as well. As I said, the first country to adopt our platform for Earth observation, and we'll also work on industry-to-industry robotic collaboration. Airbus with us have done a strategic statement of intent with the Space Agency, and I was delighted that Airbus has chosen Australia to be the launch and retrieval site for Zephyr, as Kim outlined. That Wyndham's only got 600 people, and when I explained to the Airbus team and the team at UK Space Agency, this is going to be the biggest party in Wyndham has ever seen, and that is one barbecue that I would love to go to. And then the UK team said, oh, we probably need to change the name. Oh, you can't change the name of Wyndham. And they said, well, we chose it because apparently this literally is like a really big paper plane, as you said, launched by 5 people. They told me 7 actually, as they run it down the runway, and it climbs up to about 20 kilometres. So it sits above weather. It sits above commercial, hopefully above commercial aircraft, and it can stay up. The record is 24 days, and we're hoping that when it launches in Australia, we'll have the record of 3 months up there. And you can put 3 or 4 payloads on this for communication or Earth observation. So we were delighted that they chose Western Australia for that, and apparently because it's not windy up there, so go figure. The other decision, we've signed an agreement with Situational, the Italian satellite manufacturer. They will begin manufacturing of nanosatellites up to 300 kilogram satellites, and they have chosen Adelaide for that. And we're delighted that Australia will have its first major satellite manufacturer in this country. Now, we've got a little tiny team of 2 people who look after space legislation and regulation, and I'm always astounded by what they do, but I was never more astounded that they managed to get through both the lower house and the Senate the amendments to the Space Activities Act for launches and returns. The Senate was a little distracted when we got this through, and so when they asked for amendments, none came out. So we got it through with no amendments because of those distractions. So I'm delighted that Australia is one of the first countries now to have updated its laws. This was a process that started some 10 years ago. What it will do is remove barriers to participation. It will lower the insurance requirements for smaller satellites whilst maintaining the safety of our space activities. It will help us implement some certain international obligations, but it will also now cover some of the newer aspects of space. Launching a space ship from an aircraft was not even included in our laws, and this of course is important for space tourism, so Enrico needed that amendment more than anyone else. It will also allow us now to cover high-powered rockets, and it streamlines the approvals process. We've only had 5 certificates issued between 2003 and 2015, and already our little team of 2 people is working on another 17 applications. So you can see that things are really starting to speed up. Let me quickly go through and finish with some of the priorities. There we go. So very briefly, communications is such an important priority for this country, and Australia needs to make choices in space. We can't do everything, but of course, as an island, sitting where we are, nothing could be more important to us. Already 3/4 of our current market is based on communication. But we don't want to be left behind in the next generation of communication. Most of our communication in space on Earth is in the radio spectrum. The next jump will be using light. And for the students in the room, because we're already past this, but for the students in the room, you need to start thinking right now what you're going to be able to do with 10 terabits a second. That's everything ever written in 30 seconds. That is, we're worrying about 5G, the next G on our phones coming. This is 500 times the bandwidth of 5G. This is 100 times the bandwidth of what we can currently do at the Deep Space Communications Centre. It is not too far in the future. Australia will already have its first downlink of laser from space to Earth. We use lasers in space already now. It's perfect for that. Bringing it down through the atmosphere is a little tricky and a lot more complicated, but we will already have our first downlinks, one military, one commercial here in Western Australia this year, and we will have another upgrade in Eastern Australia and possibly another commercial downlink. So this is already something that is happening, and we certainly don't want to be left behind. Our next area is space situational awareness. We can't step up and be a global citizen in every aspect, but in this aspect we think we can. We are already a critical node in the US Defence and Australia Alliance in space situational awareness, both for the C-band radar at Exmouth and soon the space telescope that will go to Exmouth. And what's extraordinary about our military assessment of debris is we're tracking some 25,000 objects, but we need to track hundreds of thousands of objects. So we're tracking those that are 10 centimetres and larger, but just ask Pam Melroy what a speck of paint can do to the windscreen of the space shuttle when it hits you at 28,000 kilometres an hour. So this is something that Australia needs to step up. We've got certainly capability that is already catching the eye of the world. I had a quick chat to Phil Bland from Curtin. I think the Desert Fireball and their project that they're doing with Lockheed Martin, as I've said publicly, Phil, is both elegant and elegantly simple, and is already getting certainly attraction on the world stage. We have the capacity to step up this partnership in both defence but also in the commercial realm as well. I mentioned position, navigation and timing with the upgrade. I'm really pleased that Australia will, as I said, not just catch up, but go further. And again, to the students in the room, when you think of 3 centimetre accuracy, so all the runners and cyclists, they love that. They want to know exactly how far they went that Saturday morning. But when you think of 3 centimetres either side of a vehicle, that means that we really will be able to pursue some of the automation technologies that we need in our cities, and I think it's extraordinary. There'll be applications on that I can't even dream of. In Earth observation, I've mentioned Geoscience Australia. I love this image. I absolutely love this image, and I'm going to just stop briefly and just describe it. You can see there that this image is highlighting the water from a river system. This is in northern Australia. This is 30 years of data, all on exactly the same area, and you can see the definition. And what they've done is colour-coded whether water was there permanently or whether water was there transiently in the colour spectrum. This is extraordinary. For the first time, you can see in this area where there's permanent water, you can see where you wouldn't put a dam because it would only be filled transiently. This is the sort of information that we can now do on our platforms. I think it's extraordinary. Can you imagine if we had that information some 40, 50 years ago as we planned our agriculture and as we look at the next few decades? It's just an extraordinary piece of work, that single image. We've got some fantastic companies as well, companies like AAM Group, who also have offices here in Perth. They're doing things like the virtual Sydney 3D project, where they took all the satellite data, then they added the pipe data and the road data, and they had this all perfectly rectified, as in it really does sit on top of each other, making a cube for the city, now adopted in some 13 cities around the world. So our expertise is exportable, and our recommendation in this area is that we quickly go to export in this area. Space services is something that we think is not short-term but medium-term, and already we've got players here in the West. So the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research starting a partnership with Tsukuba University in Japan, looking at things like muscle wastage and bone density loss for astronauts. And of course, both of those are absolutely important when we consider the challenges of ageing. So these are the sort of services that we think we'll be able to do in space. Now, this is not a control room of NASA. This is not the European Space Agency's control room. This is the control room, Rio Tinto control room in Perth. When we describe that we're managing resources in the Pilbara from control room that's 1,500 kilometres away, when I describe that internationally, and then we describe that the Pilbara is bigger than the United Kingdom itself, this is an enormous area to try and get that message across. We have our last priority is what we call Earth to Space and Space to Earth. We think that what we do in this country in managing remote assets is absolutely applicable to managing assets in space, and what we're learning about managing remotely in space is going to be applicable here. You heard about Woodside and Robonaut. This is a natural partnership between our oil and gas mining industries and agriculture and space. We called an area sort of leapfrog areas. We've got some really nice research areas in Australia that are not fully on the world stage, but we think with a little bit of nurturing we can get there. Things like quantum technologies, and already the world is working with us on developing quantum storage and the first satellites. Already we're working on partnerships for secure communication in space. Our astronomy areas, as Peter outlined, already world-class and respected. We are the natural country to develop the Internet of Things constellations of satellites in orbit. And whilst the older satellites took billions of dollars and maybe 18 months and were huge and exquisite, we can now build a satellite in 8 hours. So the Planet satellites, 2 streams of manufacturing. The manufacturing area is half the size of this room. 2 satellites every 8 hours, and we're the natural home to be doing those sort of constellations to be able to support our agriculture and our industries in remote areas. Optical research for laser comms as well. As I said, this is the next generation. This country invented Wi-Fi because John O'Sullivan and the team used the thinking and the mathematics of listening to the most distant galaxies and their radio signals. They approached it completely different to the way everyone else was approaching it, which was looking at which signal arrived the fastest to your phone. And they said, well, that doesn't work if you're listening to a distant galaxy. They had to use Fourier transform approaches, so the students will look that up. So I dropped that in for those mathematicians in the room. We also are looking at next generation propulsion systems. So propulsion systems on orbit, you don't need a lot of propulsion when you're on orbit and satellite, but it's very important that you can manoeuvre and you do that effectively. We've got some wonderful companies looking at that. Hypersonics across the full spectrum. Some of the 3D printed fuel recently. Gilmore, the Gilmore team received $19 million of funding, which will take their hybrid rocket technology through to orbit, which is great. So I was going to conclude with something, but unfortunately, Kim, you quoted me on my conclusion, which is written here. So now I'm sort of stumped as to actually how to finish, because I was going to share that space is the defining domain for human endeavour, but you've already shared that. So what I really wanted to share was that this country can do this. Every single person in this room, we know we have the creativity, we know we have the entrepreneurship, we absolutely know that we can run through the legs of giants. We simply have a can-do attitude. The team, as you can see at the Space Agency, is working incredibly hard to catch up. We do absolutely want to partner with other nations on a shared ambition. We are already talking to other nations now about our participation in interplanetary missions. We are already talking to players about how we assist in colonisation off our Earth, and we would love to have discussions about finding new life. We are going to receive into this country in 2020 the Japanese Space Agency's Hayabusa samples of a meteorite, and I have to tell you, the hardest thing to write at now is our team is writing the partnership with Biosecurity Australia, in that they actually have to sign off on this sample that is going to come from the asteroid, and they're going, well, will there be life on it? Well, we don't know, but we want to test for that. So don't spray it with fly spray. And they said, well, how do we know what? We don't know what's on it. So this conversation with Biosecurity Australia, I can just picture them, khaki shorts, khaki shirt sleeves, standing there. It arrives, and I'm not sure how we're going to get it past, but we will. So, as I said, we can dream this big, and you should all dream this big. And to the students in this room, do not limit your vision. We're not limiting our vision in the Space Agency, and you can dream this big because of the way space-based technologies have connected us here on Earth. And we want to take this country into the next era of space for Australia. Thank you very much.